more people are coming in yet, so what I'm going to do is I'll talk for as long as I can, which normally would be about 45 minutes. The material that I have is much more extensive, so it's going to be somewhat limited. And then we'll have some time for discussion and for sharing of your own personal experiences and any other questions that you might have. I titled this thing Normal and Paranormal. Now, normal consciousness, reality is what we're experiencing right now. But there's a difference between normal and paranormal. Now, paranormal is not necessarily abnormal, and we use that word paranormal because the word paranormal means alongside of. And when we talk about realities, a paranormal reality is a dimension of a being that we're not usually tapped into. And what happens, for example, is that right now with studies in quantum physics and quantum mechanics, scientists are realizing that the universe was created not necessarily with the Big Bang, but actually before that. Now, we don't know, obviously, when reality was created and where it came from. And so we call that God. And we say that God is the original designer. There are atheists that come to me and want to deny the fact that there is a God, and then I always say to them, well, explain yourself. How do you justify your existence? Where did you come from? What about the design? Not only of humans, but of all animal life, of the world, of creation itself. Why does this happen? And that's the big question of why. There are a multiplicity of universes. And quantum mechanics has opened the door to that study. Where did life come from? Carl Sagan, Francis Crick say that we are stardust, that somewhere in the distant past, molecules from the stars filtered down to Earth and life was generated. And so we became, through the process of evolution, human beings. But no one has been able to say where that design came from, where that intention came from, and why did this happen in this way. So we can refer to God as the great designer. You have to pardon me, I suffered a compression fracture in my spine earlier this year, and it's still not healed yet, so that's why
You want to raise that?
yeah.
It should just pull up.
I was leaning on it, it keeps,
Yeah, I don't know if you can.
there we go. Okay.
Is that better? Or?
That's fine, that's good. The ancient world recognized that there were a dual reality. And we came to the realization that there was a spiritual dimension to life. You go back to the ancient Greeks, and they had their gods and goddesses who lived in this world on Mount Olympus. But they also penetrated a spiritual dimension. And both in the Assyrian and Egyptian cultures as well, they had their gods and goddesses that visited and either helped or asserted themselves on humans. The biblical concept was that there were 7 stories to the world, or to the heavens. And 7 is the magic number in biblical thinking, because The biblical concept of seven numbers, of seven heavens, comes from the fact that seven is a very special number, which means the completion or fulfillment. So the earth and the world was created in 7 days according to Genesis. There are, well, seven is usually referred to. In fact, even Paul refers to the fact that there are seven heavens, and he is in the third one, or aspires to the third one, which he calls paradise. But seven is a number of completion and entirety. It means all of things, not just this world, but all worlds. The Bible helps us understand how there is access to the divine. There are so many stories, I don't want to go into all of them right now, but just for example, Moses encountering God in the burning bush. What's going on in his mind as he sees this bush that is on fire but is not being consumed? And he starts talking to God. How does one talk to God? Who is doing the listening? When you pray, who hears you? See, where do those words go? So that's a question. Now, how does one hear God speaking? Jacob's ladder is another example. There are steps incrementally that one approaches the heavens. Jesus said to the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. Well, what is paradise? Paradise is not a place, but the word paradise means, it comes from an Assyrian word meaning a future fulfillment, a merging into, well, they wouldn't use it in those terms, but it is a kind of emerging into a cosmic consciousness, a restored state of being with God. In other words, one goes back to where one comes from originally, not just human birth, but beyond that. So where were we before we were born? Now think about that sometime. Where were you before you were born? Where did your spirit come from? Just referring to Jesus, and there were so many appearances that we would call mystical in his life. But just focus on what happened after he was crucified, the resurrection. There's many appearances of resurrection. Is Jesus a physical being or a spiritual one after his death? He encounters the women in the garden, and he says to Mary Magdalene, "Don't touch me. Noi me tangere." You see that in John 20, verse 17. He says that because he says he has not yet attained his spiritual body. Yet at the same time, a little later, he says to Thomas, who doubts whether or not he's real, "Touch me." So what is it? Don't touch me or touch me? One could ask also the question with ghosts or apparitions. Have breakfast. You know, the Bible says Jesus had breakfast with his disciples on the beach. How can a spiritual being eat? Or is it a physical being that is there? So what is Jesus' resurrected body? Physical or spiritual, or both? Another interesting story comes from the Apocalypse of Peter. And you know this story too because you've heard the word Polaris, right? Where are you going? Peter tries to run away from turmoil created at the crucifixion. And he sees an apparition of Jesus. And Peter says to him, "Where are you going?" And the apparition says to him, "I'm going to Jerusalem to be crucified." So is this just fiction, or is this another story? Also, let me give you these words from the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. It is necessary to boast. Nothing is to be gained by it. But I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a person in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up into the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body. I do not know. God knows. And I know that such a person, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up into paradise. The older versions say caught up into heaven, and heard things that are not to be told, that no mortal is permitted to speak. So what is Paul talking about in this out-of-body experience? We can go into a whole lot of examples from the mystics, and I don't have the time to actually do that. But what I'm really trying to show you is that from the very beginning, people realized that there was an alternate reality, that there was something more beyond this life. And in fact, anthropologists have discovered that even Neanderthal creatures, when they buried their dead, coated them with red ochre and supplied them with food. Why? They're dead. Because there was an inherent belief that there was something more beyond death. You've all seen this picture, and I had it on my thing there. This is known as the Flammarion, named after Camille Flammarion, who published it in 1888. But some scholars say it dates back to 1520, that period. And what it shows is a pilgrim on earth poking his head into the cosmos, into an alternate reality. So you see, almost from the beginning of human writing, there was the idea that there was something more beyond the experiences that we now have, beyond the normal. There was a paranormal. And I don't know whether I can actually show this picture. It's kind of, maybe I'll just pass this around, but what Carl Jung and Morton Kelsey had a diagram in which they have a concept of human psyche. And he said that the point of this, of our consciousness, focus is like a flashlight in a darkened room, and you shine the light on a particular object, and that comes to your consciousness. In other words, what are you thinking about right now? That's the point of your consciousness. But beyond that, going back to the psychic side, there is another reality that also impinges upon our subconscious, this part. And what that does is you have vision, you have extrasensory perception of the visible world, you have a numinous experience, in other words, an awareness of an alternate reality. You have a last stage of the psyche, or the psyche of the soul, and you can see, I'll just, you can take a look at this and pass that around. So consciousness is like a dim flashlight in a darkened room, The mystical experience is a brighter light that illumines and makes us aware of a greater reality. Now, at this point, I'm going to sit down because my back is starting to help. You don't mind. Several years ago, I did a doctoral study on what persons have regarded as paranormal or mystical. My own personal experiences in paranormal date back to actually childhood, but came to fruition when I lived up in my first church in Martins Creek, which is above Eastern. And we lived in a house that was built in around 1825 and was owned by a former district attorney of Montana, who actually ran for governor of Pennsylvania, a man by the name of James. And during that 3-year period, we experienced 28 unusual events. Now, when you think back of these, you take each one of these events, you might be able to describe a legitimate, rational explanation for them. But the fact that there were so many just overwhelmed us. Just for example, we went out one afternoon and returned at night and to find every light in the house turned on. When I say every light, I'm talking about lights down in the basement and the attic. Every light that could be illuminated was turned on. My wife experienced a lot of these things, and people who were coming, visiting, would hear the sound of someone walking upstairs, but no one was up there. You see, she went out to hang up her laundry on the clothesline. When she went back, the door was locked. And I met her when I returned. She was still outside. And we went in, and every door in the house was locked. And the door that she went out had a deadbolt on it, and that was turned. Now, how do you turn a deadbolt from the outside? You don't have a key. Well, there were just so many of these things that happened. And I wrote about them in one of my books. All of the psychic things that occurred are not necessarily extraordinary, so that you can say, wow, that happened. But you also can get a sense of the holy from being in various places that are special to you. Now think about this for a moment. Is there a place in your experience that is so meaningful to you that you can sense the presence of God there? One of the meaningful places for me is my camping experience at Mensch Mill. And I had the pleasure of meeting Fred Wenzel, who was one of the founders of Mensch Mill. Most of you know what Mensch Mill is. It was a camp of our church located over in Hereford Township, regionally called the Booth. But Fred Wenzel, who was also my predecessor when I was pastor at Christ Church, who was the founding pastor, on his way back from Chicago on the train, wrote a poem. And the poem had special meaning to him and to all of those who went to that camp. And let me just read this to you. Some of you know this by heart, but I often think of you, O glad Mensch Mill, Your friendships deep and dear, your far-viewed hill, where silence whispers low and God comes near, where souls are freed by love that knows no fear. I walk your laughing paths, your quiet wood, and dream of times that know no law but good. Will mend my ways be fair and bravely right, clean as your morning sun, calm as your night. I see your lights grow dim, your candles glow, high stars through trees above, bright fires below. My heart is full of you, O gracious mill, O friends whose hands are true, O far-viewed hill. Now, knowing Fred Wenzel, I didn't know him very well, but this was a mystical experience for him, a special experience, because he and many campers who went there really sensed the presence of God, not only in the surrounding woods, but in the spirits of the campers who were there, in the community. So God can dwell in community if it's very special. Now, there are psychic manifestations as well. We talked about extrasensory perception, psychokinesis, the ability to move objects without touching them, precognition, knowing that something is going to happen before it does, clairvoyance and clairaudience, seeing and hearing things that normal humans don't normally see, sensing apparitions, either sensing or seeing, out-of-body experiences. I'm going to give you some examples here. What happens at the moment of death, near-death experiences, precognitive dreams. Dale can talk more about that sometime. What I did was I collected dozens of stories of persons who have seen apparitions. And there's always a question of whether what they have seen is witnessed by others to confirm it, or is it purely a personal encounter, perhaps the result of a mental state. I think you're all familiar with that soliloquy from Shakespeare's Macbeth, when he says, just before he's about to murder Duncan, he has this flash, and he sees a dagger, and he says, "Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou a dagger of the mind, a false creation, proceeding from the heat oppressed brain?" So the question is, do people who see ghosts, are they mentally ill? And yet so many people have seen apparitions. In my doctoral studies, which was called Mysticism in Ministry, this is the volume I have. Quite a thick book, isn't it? But what I did was I had over 200 people respond to questionnaires. And I went through those questionnaires and I selected 22 persons that I would follow up and ask questions of. Some of these were ordinary people, some nurses, a police chief, a couple of clergy people, a few others, many others. They're all documented here. What did they see that gave them a sense that God was real to them? Let me just give you a couple examples. I went to visit a man of my church by the name of Marvin, He was in the hospital near death. I walk into his room, and he's sitting up in his bed talking to an empty chair. And I said, Marvin, who are you talking to? My brother. His brother had died many years earlier, but he was having a conversation. Katie was another person. One of my early visits when I was pastorate to St. John's Church in Kutztown. She was dying, and it was the day before Christmas, and I visited her. And she told me that during the night, she saw her brother standing in the doorway to the kitchen. They had moved her bed down to the first floor to the dining room. She could see into the kitchen. And she said, her brother said to her, I will see you soon. The next day, Christmas night, she died. Is that an experience of an alternate reality? One of our UCC ministers visited the cathedral at San Salvador, and she sensed the presence of Oscar Romero. You remember that story of Oscar Romero was assassinated? He had been killed there. And she said she could feel him, and she had this tingling sensation all over her body. Another one of my church members had gone through a very difficult pregnancy. She wakes up and she sees the apparition of her mother coming through the door, walking over toward her bed, looking down at the bassinet in which her newborn baby was lying. She smiles, turns, and goes out. Is this an apparition? Or is this a mental image that she forms in her own mind that gives her assurance? One of the other people that I've questioned in my interviews, a woman wakes up and she sees an opaque thing, that's called it, hovering around the foot of her bed. What happens? I mentioned my wife Mary Ann up in Martins Creek when she was also on a very hot summer night in August. It was very humid, very hot, and she sees, not seeing with the mind, but feeling and sensing the presence of someone in that room. And she reaches out and she feels a space that is cold and damp. And she moves her hand around and it's in a human form. Is it a figment of the imagination? Or is there something there? Another one would be an operating room nurse in Reading Hospital. And when I interviewed her, she told me that there was an automobile accident out in the Burnville area, and some teenagers had died, but one girl was brought in, and they were working on her, and she was on the operating table. And this nurse said that she sensed her presence above the operating table, and she heard the voice inside of her saying, "Can't they do something? Why can't they do something?" The girl died. Now what's also interesting to this is later on, I talked to a friend of mine, I don't know if some of you maybe remember Leo Francipani, who was a surgeon at told him about this, and he went, I know what happened. The president of the hospital and I were in the morgue. We saw the corpse of that young girl, and there was a glowing light above her. He couldn't explain it, and I couldn't either. Now, most people that I interviewed had very simple experiences in which they felt closer to God. It could have been a walk in the woods. It could have been knowing what someone was going to say even before they said it. All kinds of various things. I have them all documented here. And I think these are the questions that I asked. And I'm going to read these questions off to you and think about your own experiences, whether or not you've had any of these. A feeling of being uplifted by extraordinary beauty in nature. A sense of having experienced an event before and of being able to accurately predict the next sequence in the event. That's more than deja vu. A sense of being at one with God. An intense religious experience which you find difficult to describe. A flash of insight in which you suddenly felt you knew all at once the purpose of your existence. Do you know why you are here? Why you have been born? A sense of being in the presence of a spiritual being. A feeling of contact with the divine through contact with a material object. For example, a cross, or communion elements in which we are aware of the presence of Christ within us. A sense of holiness, of being in the presence of God. A sense of overpowering love. A sense of being loved. Knowing of an event before it occurred. Seeing events that happened at a great distance as they were happening. Reminds you of Emanuel Swedenborg. You've probably heard that story too. Who saw the fire in Stockholm as he was 200 miles away from it, and it was occurring at the same time. Felt as though you were really in touch with someone who had died. Be interested to know if you've had any of those experiences. Sensing or seeing the presence of another person who is far away from you. Thought you were somewhere you had been before, but knowing that was impossible. Knowing what a person is about to say before they have said it. A dream in which an insight or information was communicated to you. A dream about an event which later came true. Felt as though you were very close to a powerful spiritual force that seemed to lift you out of yourself. A near-death experience in which you felt you had insight or communion with an afterlife. An inexplicable event for which you have had no physical explanation. A healing of the body of yourself or someone close to you, which you regard as beyond the scope of ordinary medicine. I have had a number of those experiences with people with laying on of hands, miraculous healings. A strong urge which compelled you to alter your course of action and which produced beneficent results, like averting a disaster. A sense of confrontation with the demonic, of being in the presence of evil. You felt as though you were in touch with someone when they were far away from you. That's similar to the other question. a meditative experience which gave you insight into the nature of God or God's direction in your life. Speaking in tongues. A dream in which you felt you were receiving divine instruction. Praying in which you knew that your prayer was being answered even as you prayed. Hearing another person speaking in tongues which you felt was a gift of God. A sense of God's presence bringing comfort and consolation in a time of distress and anxiety. Being present with a dying person who said that they had an insight or vision of the afterlife. A sense that your personality has been taken over by something more powerful. A momentary feeling of being totally at peace without any concern for worldly or personal problems. An experience which confirmed your religious belief in an afterlife. Those were the 35 questions that were posed. Now, is there anyone in this room who has not had at least one of those experiences? Okay. Sandy?
Well, yeah, I don't think I have, except near the end. It sounded like what you said might be what's happened to me more than once, where my life radically changed because of meeting someone, or like something happening, like, you know, a few times, even maybe my life being saved, or I'll just give you one example. My life changed when I was in a Borders bookstore and picked up this magazine signed to mine. And I saw in the back in the directory there were study groups, and there were only 3 in Pennsylvania, and 1 was in Akron. And so I called that person and I started going to his study group. And that's how I met my companion. And it was because I picked up that magazine. And, you know, a few other things happened like that. And that's the only thing. But none of the other
That raises the question
things.
of why things happen the way they do.
What?
Why do things happen the way they do? One of the books that I have is titled Gray Matter, the Mind, Dark Matter, the Universe, and Doesn't Matter. But I say in the book that everything matters. Everything. You may not realize it or know it or appreciate it, but it will have an effect upon you, either presently or at a distant time, accumulated with other things. How many of you have seen an apparition? Okay, 2 of you. Okay. Anybody want to share anything? I'll open this up to the floor right now. Anybody?
Are you all okay if I record this, or would you like me to stop? I don't want you to share something that you don't want. Okay.
Well, let me widen the question here. How many of you have had what we call a mystical experience, an awareness of the presence of God? Several here. Anybody want to share anything? Dale?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. There's a situation where somebody's going to die and drown, and I didn't know that person was there in the surf. We were living in Hawaii at the time, and somehow I found that person. And I brought her back. powerful. Because I don't know how I did it. Something forced me to find it. What was
Yeah, these things can really affect our psyche and our emotions. And memory is an important part of this as well. You know, why isn't there such a thing as memory?
You know, I think sometimes, I think a lot of us feel that in church, right, or in a holy place. Some places you don't feel it. Some places have a negative feel. And I always feel that when I'm here and worshiping here, but the most acute one was the Sagrada Familia that's being finished now in Barcelona. And I think, because, I mean, I can't spend more than an hour or two in one place. I need to move on. I was there 6 hours, and it was just connected. And I think it's because the guy who created it, Gaudi, who planned it, did everything based on nature. It wasn't some gleaming, thing to God. It was all about nature, and I think there was something about that made it more holy.
When you think about holy places, now I've traveled to more than 50 countries. In fact, I worked in Israel for a while. There are places that are designated as holy. You know, the pilgrims go to the Via Dolorosa, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and so on. There are other places, just being in Jerusalem itself, when you reflect and stand. I remember the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, a Jewish man was standing praying at the Western Wall, and he was so caught up in emotion. He was, doing his bowing in front of the wall, but he was so close to it, and he was actually banging his head into the wall, and until he was bleeding, and the attendants had to come out and take him away because he had that kind of experience of the holy in his mind. So places can do this. Being with a group of people that you have befriended, camp, church, other places. Why do we have communion? The word communion means within the walls. It also means that those who are gathered their spirits are one in Christ. I believe in a universal consciousness, a collective unconsciousness, that when things happen to us, to me, they're part of a universal whole that other people can tap into. Maybe not in this life, but eventually. So you take the billions of people who have ever lived, and what does their collective experiences amount to?
I'm not sure exactly how to ask this question. Winston Churchill described his life as he had like a black cloud. He had his black dog days. He had a black cloud over his head. From the time I was a little kid, I was forced to go to church. Home life was horrible, but forced to go to church because the neighbors would see us walking to church. something, feeling something. And, you know, yeah, my mom died, the ceiling fan started moving. I never saw a ghost. I don't feel like, and is it possible, I guess I'm asking you as a, you know, in your vast experience in life, I mean, are there people that can't connect to another realm? Because that's how I've felt for most of my life. You know, I'm an artist, I love music, I'm out there, but I feel like I'm bouncing off. I don't feel like God hears me when I pray. Never did. You know, I'm an ex-Jehovah's Witness, so pray for me.
Well, I usually tell the Jehovah's Witness that come to my door that I'm in the Jehovah's Witness protection program.
Ah,
That's good.
Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Any questions?
Why is it always considered evil when you see apparitions? Like, being a nurse, I've seen plenty of ghosts. I've seen ghosts since I was young. I've seen a lot of things. But if you see something, automatically it's of the devil. That doesn't make sense.
I thank Hollywood for it for that.
yeah.
Well, it was down my mom's house, going to hell with. One day I said to her, the moon was full and it was sitting right at the top of her driveway. And I said, if I feel from that, and I was damned to hell from that day on. So I don't get why people make that leap so quickly.
That's a good question. Why certain individuals who have passed on kind of remain on this earthly plane? Why don't they go on to the greater consciousness or to the light, as they say? And the answer that I had is because they're still trying to find out. The reason you see apparitions is, one, because they want to communicate something to a loved one. Two, they are unsure of where to go, what to do. They need to be directed to the light. So they're not necessarily evil. We perceive them as being evil.
That most people do, but that's usually what you hear, and that's unfortunate because there is evil out there, but there is demonic, there are demons. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean it's every one of them.
Well,
I
Harry,
remember the Bible verse from Isaiah where God says, I am the Lord, I create weal and I create woe. And some translations say, I create evil. So if God is all powerful, is evil part of it? And I would say that's part of the process. In the end, all things will be reconciled to the common source, to God. And that evil is the learning experience that we have to go through.
I figure a culture that calls apparitions, if you will, spirit guides, to put it in a positive light, because we tend to evilize anything we don't understand.
That's true.
Apparitions are not really bad, because I'm not going to sell television.
Yes,
Then there's the trance mediums. There's one I know that you used to go to, a lot of people did in Berks County, and that was Katie. She spoke through George, right?
Right.
And then there's Abraham Hicks, and there's others too.
Now, see, in terms of precognition, I was just going to be talking about Katie, and you spoke up, right? So our minds are on the same page. Katie is is a discarded entity that came through a retired postal worker by the name of George Yulee. And this was back in the 60s and 70s and so on. And Katie, her name was Katrinka Knoxted, and she died in a skiing accident in Luxembourg. But she came to enlighten those of us who gathered around to listen to her. And I was very skeptical at the time. But what I was interested in is the reason and philosophy that this woman was communicating. And George, being an uneducated postal worker, I mean, Katie was talking things that he would not know of normally. In fact, he did not know what he was saying. His wife had to record the sessions and play it back for him afterwards. Now, what is happening here, and why is this happening? Steve, I don't know if you remember Arthur Hill from Albright.
No.
He attended these sessions too, and Ellery Haskell as well.
Yeah, I knew him.
Yeah, Ellery was my mentor in doing this book, but we had a lot of scholars, educated people, philosophers that attended these sessions and posed questions. And I have recordings of most of those sessions. And some people want me to donate them, but I'm not ready to give them up yet. But the fact that where does this information come from?
Harry, do you think that maybe, along with this question, that a lot of people use spiritual events or spiritual powers to scam people sometimes? I mean, right? And that's why I think people often fear them. Yeah, think about Joseph Smith, right? The founder of the Mormons. Total scam artist. He would go in and talk about all these, you know, that he would see gold coming out of the ground, but it would disappear. And he was a gold douser, and he got tarred and feathered, and he was scamming people with it. But not everybody does, right? So it's really hard to know when it's real, and like speaking in tongues. The Apostle Paul thought it was such that you could use it as a scam. So he wrote, the only way you can speak in tongues in church is if there's someone there to interpret for you. And if there's no one to interpret for you, keep your mouth shut and keep it to yourself. Because he saw that people were using it to scam folks.
Prerequisite for membership.
Yes, please.
As someone that comes from a background which is speaking tongues, my original background is Pentecostal, and free music right now, into religion. But one of the things about tongues, there's another case that Apostle Paul talks about, used to edify oneself.
Right.
And it was disrupting the service as well.
That's right.
So it was not in order. Paul likes order, things done decently and in order. And my experience, since I brought it up, I may not speak in tongues as much as I used to, because I realized too it was also the atmosphere that I was in that preempted it. I mean, I still can, I just don't feel the need to, because maybe that's what I needed for edification. But a lot of times when I would get into congregations that maybe weren't speaking in tongues during worship, and I didn't really want to stand out or anything, I always look at my own motive. But a lot of times when I would say tongues would come when I'm in extreme suffering or sorrow and extreme joy. Like those two extremes is what would preempt me. I'm coming from African American experience, so there's music in the background, so it's not like silent like right now. That would be awkward.
And we all understand you.
But there would be times in a church that was quiet that I could feel that. I just would not. But I've always looked at it for edification. I have experienced a time in the church where there was a guy that would stand up and speak in tongues, and then an interpreter would stand up.
Yep.
And to us, it felt right, the congregation. But our experiences are always changing, and I'm learning not to judge another's experience. I do too believe it's a collective consciousness, and I believe that we grow as much as we give spirit the ability to bring us into new experiences without judging or rationalizing as much, but just kind of accepting the experiences that we have. And that makes me more of a seeker.
Thank you. That reminds me that there are people that ask, what language does God speak? Way back when, I don't know when, in the Middle Ages, some scholars were trying to figure out what's the language of the angels. And what they did was they took some children, newborn, and put them out into the wilderness and provided food for them, but did not speak with them. So that as they grew up, they would speak the language that they inherited from where they came from before this life. I don't know if there was any answers to that, but so what language does God speak? And one of the questions that was often raised, and I remember this was some kids in confirmation class, not you, Susan, but where does God come from? Who created God? And that was a big thing. The Spirit of God is in each person. And this is the Celtic belief in panentheism. Panentheism says that the spiritual God, the spiritual nature of God is in all things and in all people. And you can tap into even inanimate objects and get wisdom from it. So the Druids, who were the leaders of the Celtic community, the word Druid means oak knower. And they would use the oak, they would embrace the oak. You talk about tree huggers. Well, the Druids were tree huggers because they derived the essential spirit of the tree and brought that in, and the wisdom of the tribe was inherent in that sacred oak. It's another way of saying that collectively, shared wisdom. The Spirit of God is there and communicates. And within the church, we listen to a lot of people. Now, some people are really flaked out, but most of the time, the church has derived its wisdom from collectively the Spirit of God in each person. And in the eschaton, it will all be resolved. My favorite Yogi Berra quote is, "It's not over until it's over." So we don't know what's going to happen until the final thing. Yes?
I don't know where this came from. Years ago, I did transcendental meditation. I was a Scientologist. I lived at the Church of Scientology for a year out in Arizona. My whole life I've been searching. But somewhere along the line, I developed this really strong feeling that, okay, I was in electronics school for 3.5 years. Cells are round, and they say that God's energy, God's force, God's presence is in the space between the cells. Like everything that was created by God, and we are connected through our cellular level. Like if our brains were properly lined up, we could walk through a stone wall. The Philadelphia experiment, that battleship, there's so much about the world that we don't know. And I don't know why I started talking about that, I'm not sure. Because that was my thing about God is in us. It's in ourselves. It's that energy that gives us life. When we're born, that's what makes us take our first breath.
And not only in human beings, but in all life forms.
Everything.
when I was in college, I read a book called The Biology of the Spirit by Edmund Sinnott, Sinnogg, in which he says, and he shows evidence that even the amoeba can make decisions. So if, when you look at the smallest life form, the essence of God is in that life form. Collectively, it grows. Now, when you break down the amoeba, there are subatomic particles, and you break down the subatomic particles, the mesons, the leptons, the borons, and so on. When you get down to the basic unit, there's nothing there except vibration, energy. So the Spirit of God is a universal creative energy. More exploration. Anything else for the good of the order? Yeah.
My parents are both passed, you know. I see them regularly in my dreams as, like when they were younger, not the age when they passed. And we're just like doing ordinary things, like sitting around a table or going somewhere. And sometimes I wonder if I'm making it all up in my head, or if it's them just being there, still with me.
I think it's both. I think the latter thing is more true. And Dale, I was going to ask you about the precognitive nature of dreams. Of where do dreams emanate from?
Well, we have concepts, but that's all they are. The universal matrix, the Akasha records, name whatever name you want to give it, it's there. The information is out there in the cosmos, and somehow or beyond it, if we just access that.
For those of you who don't know it, Dale has written 2 books on River of Dreams, River and
Attraction, psychic wilderness, yeah.
Yeah, and he has done a lot of exploration in this. In fact, last week he did a program on lucid dreaming for Soul Cafe.
Harry, I think sometimes people think it's so, you have to be so out there to experience these things, but I'm a very practical thinker person, and yet probably 30 years ago, I started realizing that I'd have a dream, I'd think about somebody, and I'd call them, and most of the time there was something wrong. Like it was someone close to me, not just a person I'd met, but someone close to me who I had a connection with. And I came, and this happened to me actually when I was in college, one time with my father when I had a breakdown on the road, and he woke up in the middle of the night when it happened, and we were not close. It's just that we had that connection. So I think it's almost like I never opened myself up to that until I decided to open myself up to it. And when it happens, I don't ignore it now. I ignored it for a long time. And then I'd find out later that this person had died, or this person was sick, or this person was having trouble in their marriage. We all have troubles, but we also have connections, and I don't think we should ignore them.
Yeah, when I retired from St. John's a while back, people were asking me, what are you going to do next? And I said, I'm thinking about becoming a Zen Buddhist, Zen Quaker.
Zen Quaker.
And
I'll
of course I
join.
couldn't do that, otherwise I'd lose my standing, right? But
I like Quakers.
Buddhists, for example, the essential doctrine of Buddhism is awareness, of being aware of not only where you are, but who you are, and what's inside of you, and what happens to you. Total awareness, and trying to make sense of it all. And that's our spiritual growth. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time here. And
For the sake of it, Jim, this over here, Scott Peck talks about grace with the same words we use for precognition. So, we just use words to make it fit our positive affection. Scott Peck says, you know, when you get an insight, something's gonna happen and it changes your behavior, that's grace.
Well, could we thank Harry, please?
I have some other announcements here for you. First of all, I have some books here, for those of you who are interested in buying them, $20 a piece. Most of it came out of this book, The Mysticism of Ordinary and Extraordinary Experience, and Dale Graff did the foreword to this, and that's there. My first book was The Dwelling Place of Wonder, which is mostly a kind of a biographical thing, but it shows how life was formed in me, so that I became the person who I am. When people ask me about the other side of memory, and they say, well, what's the other side of memory? I tell them I forget. But this has a lot of memories in here, Celtic journeys and Mensch Mill tapestry, ghosts, so on. And the latest book, which came out last year, Gray Matter, Dark Matter, and Doesn't Matter, Essays on the Mind, the Universe, and Whatever, is also deals with some of these things. Here's another interesting thing too. Anybody ever hear of the movie The Blob?
He may have.
The story about the Blob is that my wife was assistant organist in Phoenixville at Unburian Reformed Church, and she finished playing the organ, practicing, and was sitting on the front steps and saw all this commotion across the street diagonal. And here they were filming The Blob. And this actor came over and sat down next to her, and she asked him what was going on, and he told her, and here it was Steve McQueen. So there are a lot of other things. Of course, the Mass Exit out of the Colonial Theater, when we dated, we all went to the Colonial Theater, and one time after the filming, the floor was so sticky from all of the popcorn and other spillages there, and I said, gee, they left part of the Blob here. There's a lot of other stories in this book here too. Next month, Sandy is going to be talking about Tolkien for our times. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Well, a couple of years ago, I presented a talk on J.R.R. Tolkien at the at Soul Cafe. So Harry asked if I'd talk about Tolkien for today. Now, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to put that together, but I have so much material about him, and I will also talk about his fellow Inklings, who they were a group that met at C.S. Lewis's office in Oxford. They were all professors. And I think an interesting thing too, most of those famous fantasy writers, and there's about 4 or 5 of them, they also wrote religious books. I find that very interesting. So, and it's the best fantasies I think that have ever been written were written by that group of men. So I will have to bring them into it too a little bit.
Was Lewis Carroll included in that?
No,
I
no,
wouldn't.
I
He's
don't.
talking
I'm
C.S.
not
Lewis.
sure what year,
and,
if they knew him or not.
C.S. Lewis and
C.S. Lewis,
God.
Charles Williams, he's not as well known. I read about 3 or 4 of his novels. They were really surreal. And he also wrote religious books. And there's one I just bought. I can't remember remember his name now. He was one of them too. So it's really, I really love those guys.
And that's
Next month,
October 28th
October 28th.
here. Yeah.
And if you're not on our mailing list and you want to get postings, please sign up there and leave your email. We also have a group that meets over at the United Methodist Church in West Lawn called Soul Cafe. And Gail just did a presentation on lucid dreaming. The next one is on reincarnation revisited. And I'll just read the titles here, and you'll find out about them as we go along if you're on our mailing list. Storytelling. Steve is going to do one in January on the changing face of religion. Jim Skelton, the first minutes after death. And then Nancy Omaha Boy, eternal life, the soul and its afterlife. And then we'll have a sharing of spiritual journeys. And then also the final one of the unified field of Jacopo Grinberg. So that's at Soul Cafe. Anything else? Any other questions or comments or whatever?